whenever they wish. Good morning, and welcome to this session where we'll talk about protecting online identities. I hadn't quite realized this, but at lunch yesterday, someone pointed out there's a totally different interpretation of this from the one I'm going to use today. Online identities could also be your brand, your logo, all that kind of stuff. And so we could be talking here about copyright and trademark and all that good stuff. You'll be very pleased to know we're not going to talk about that today. Let's try and keep the lawyers out of this as much as possible. What we are going to talk about, though, is online identity in terms of users and accounts and authentication and all those things. My name is Jörn Thelin. I work in the Live Identity Services team at Microsoft. As of now, I believe we're having a meeting back at base where we're going to have a slight reorganization at 12 o'clock, but we'll see where I work this afternoon. What we do, though, is we run a couple of things. We run the Live ID identity provider that is used by all of the Microsoft properties. And we also run what we're going to look at as well, the Federation Gateway. And we'll see how that becomes important later on. So, why is this of any relevance to you? Well, if you went to any of the Messenger sessions earlier this week, you would see they had an offer there. They were wanting to send 320 million users in your direction. I'm going to go one better than that today. I want to offer you 500 million users, because that's how many Live ID users that we have. I want to show how you can integrate with Live ID and also a lot of the other identity providers that we also work with. So, with that, oops, wrong button. There we go. So let's try and put this all in context. There's three perspectives that we could look at this information from. Firstly, we can look at it as web developers. And one of the key things we've heard throughout this conference is the importance of the whole user experience. And we'll see in a demo fairly shortly where you will no doubt agree with me, which is a pretty bad user experience. So we want to look at how we can actually customize that and make that a lot smoother for users. Single sign-on obviously is another great idea. I really don't want to go to a website and have to create yet another account with yet another username and yet another password. I've got loads of them already. I've got too many, in fact. Why can't I reuse the accounts I already have to sign into a website that someone else is running? And obviously, I've got a lot of data in these websites, whether it's Windows Live or Facebook. There's a lot of information in there that I've entered, whether it's contacts or photos or blog posts. And there's certain things certain sites that I'd be happy to share that information with if they're going to deliver me some value. So that's web developers. We also have to look at this from a perspective of ISVs. And maybe you guys are in that boat as well. You're developing a website or product that you offer online, and you want to make that available to third parties, whether that be organizations, companies, individuals. And so what you want is access to this 500 million users that I was talking about. But you don't want to have to go through lots of hurdles to do that. So how can we use the federation infrastructure we already have, make it easy to onboard to that, and give you more customers? The last part we have to consider is organizations. Now, a lot of companies have big IT departments. They have a lot of control over what happens within their corporate network. But setting up a federation relationship can be really hard as well. And they're probably not experts at this. This may be the first time they've done that. So can we get a turnkey solution that enables them to do that quickly? We're actually not going to look at the IT pro side of things today. We're going to focus just on web developers and a little bit on the ISV perspective. You'll see, though, throughout, if you have to get your IT department to do some of this work, then it should be a lot easier when you say how simple it can be. So let's look at our agenda. Firstly, I want to give you a very quick baseline overview of Live ID in terms of the functionality that we have and some of the ways that you can integrate into that. Then we want to look at this from an integration from a web developer perspective, and finally from an ISV perspective. So let's start at the beginning. Live ID 101. There's a lot of things that we have in our tool bag. It ranges from the very basic level of functionality, so the green that we have here, whether it be identities, authentication methods, or ways that we can resist attackers. And there's lots of options of how we do this. You know, we can authenticate users, applications, and devices. So you get to choose for your application, what is it you want to actually authenticate? Is this a user? You want to act on their behalf? Or is this just an application that's doing something in the background and there's no user there? Also, strong authentication is becoming an increasing requirement. There's a lot of companies that are starting to look at cloud services, starting to look at a lot of the products that they can actually outsource and host online. But they want guarantees of security. And whether that's they already have policies in place that require two-factor authentication or use of smart cards or some of the other options that are out there, that's important to them. So how can we enable that, again, with a low barrier to entry? The second group that we have, ones in orange here, are really the ones that are more interesting to us. So how can we look at the user experience? How can we customize that to meet the needs of our application, of our product, of our company? And then how can we actually enable data portability? I mentioned earlier there are some times that I'd be happy to share some of my user data that I have in a system. Equally, there are times when I'd not. I'd like to be in control. And that's one of the key principles that we've been working to. It's my data, it's your data. You should choose who can get access to that. And then we'll look at some of the emerging standards. In particular, OpenID is one that's been doing the rounds at the moment, and we can look at how that fits into this whole system. The third part is the federation part. And you might think, well, that's not really of interest to me. But hopefully by the end of this talk, you will understand how easy it is for companies to onboard into that federation ecosystem, both as consumers and producers of services. And this not only gives you 500 million users from Live ID, this gives you access to all the users from every other company that's integrated into that ecosystem. And that's a growing number. So, again, let's dig a little bit deeper. This is going to be a fairly quick tour, though. We've talked a little bit about the type of principles we can authenticate, whether it be users or applications or devices. There's another important set of scenarios, though, where we have principles operating on behalf of a user. And one of the key messages here is the good way to do this and the bad way to do this. So you can see in this box, we have two ways, delegation and impersonation. What's the difference? Well, impersonation is where you give me your username, you give me your password, and I can log into any system using those credentials and pretend to be you. I can impersonate you to the system that I'm logging into. And that is a pretty bad situation, and we've seen some horror stories on the news about it over the last few years. So bad, in fact, that the industry actually has a name for this. It's called the password anti-pattern. The key rule here is don't give out your password to anybody except your identity provider. That's who you authenticate to, and that should be the only person that needs your password. We've talked about some of the credentials. Again, I'm not going to go into this in detail. Just to bring out one important point, the last one here, policy-driven control. So when you're writing your website, when you're writing your web service, you want to choose the policy that you want to enforce. Which identity providers will you accept? How long duration will the tokens be? Is this sensitive information or not? Does it require encrypted connections or not? There's a lot of different policy options there. And again, we don't have time to cover them all in detail today, but that's a critical choice for you when you're developing your service or your website. And talking about the type of users, a lot of our users at the moment are obviously Hotmail accounts, which you know about, or Messenger accounts. But we also have an increasing number of things called managed domains and federated domains. And the simple distinction there is who actually handles the authentication. Some companies will outsource to us holding the account and providing the authentication services. Some people want to do that themselves. So they can be managed or federated. Okay, we've talked a lot of theory and background. So let's actually take a look at how we can integrate with Live ID. How can you use this in your application? To put this into context, we've mentioned this before, but there's two real different things we want to do here. One is we want to consume identities. We want to be able to authenticate users and identify who they are, as opposed to, on the other hand, accessing their user data. A third thing that I haven't got on here is the authorization or access control step. Now, from my perspective, we see that as the layer above us. Once we've identified the user to you, then there's a lot of business rules that you'll want to apply to work out how the access control rules should apply to your service or your website. And there's been talks earlier this week that have looked at that. Things like the Zurich web service and a lot of other options there. Okay, so let's dig into how do we consume these identities. There's really four options that we have here. The first one is you could be your own identity provider. You could ask your users to create a username and password for your site. Now, I think the general trend in the industry, certainly one that I've seen, is that people are getting fed up with this. They have too many accounts already. They don't want to keep creating new ones. So this is really becoming much less attractive of an option. So what else do we have? What other options? Well, you can link with an external identity provider. Obviously, Live ID is one of those options, but equally Google or Yahoo or lots of other identity providers out there that already have big user bases, already have lots of users with accounts. The third option you have is what's called an identity aggregator service. This is where you farm out a lot of the logic around the connectivity between different identity providers to a third-party service. So this may be a service that can integrate with Facebook, Live ID, Google, and Yahoo, all on your behalf, and all you get back is some sort of unique identifier for that user, regardless of where they came from. So that's, an attractive option in some cases. And the last one, I would suggest probably the least attractive, is actually writing a lot of this stuff yourself. Protocol-level integration. There's standards out there that you could implement this, you could do that. But really, as we've seen throughout the last few days, it's not actually about the technology. It's not about the protocol. It's not about the specification. It's actually about the user experience. So how do we leverage this and make it easy for our users? So let's take a look at a demo. If I can see the right one. So here I've got a website. I was up late last night working this out. Not quite. So this is a website. It's actually a mock-up of a sample site that we have. It's available on Codeplex. And you can see I've got a couple of integration points. The first one is up in the top right-hand corner here. There's a sign-in button. And that is a UI control that we provide that you can integrate into your site with an iframe. And this is using the familiar and standard Live ID sign-in button that you've probably seen on a lot of other websites out there. And that's an important point. It's really important for users to have some level of familiarity, whether it's, where's the link to sign in? It's really nice to have a big bold box up here that says sign in. The other option we have down here is a little bit harder to read and a little bit harder to find, but it's a web link, it's a hyperlink. It says sign in, and there's some weird URL you can see in the bottom of the bar. So I can either create a hyperlink, a magic hyperlink somehow, or I can use this UI control. Okay, so this is my website. So how does this actually look for users? I'm going to press the sign-in button. And what this has now done is it's taken me across to the Windows Live ID sign-in screen. And again, you're probably quite familiar with this. You've probably seen it on a lot of other sites. And I can go through the sign-in process. And then it authenticates me. I've typed my password into my identity provider. And then it's going to send me back to my website. And you'll notice from this URL as well, this is a website that's running in Azure. This is just a normal website. There's nothing special about this. You can do this yourself. It's pretty straightforward. And you can see here, I'm now signed in, and this site has got some sort of identifier for me. It's actually some sort of weird GUID number, but that's a unique identifier for me. So every time I sign in and come back to this site, the site will get that same identifier for me. And you can see that the site has done a few changes. It's actually changed the context menu down here to recognize my signed in state. And the button up here has changed to sign out, again, to reflect the context. So let me just go back. So what's the problem with this? Well, imagine, if you will, how much money I've spent getting UI designers to work out the perfect scheme, the perfect color scheme, the perfect logos for this website. It's nice green, subtle context here with some logos at the top. And it's a really jarring experience. I go to this stark white screen. That's a horrible user experience in general. And it's a big problem for you as a site developer. So let's take a quick look. Oops, wrong one. Let's take a quick look to understand what's happening and look at some of the options what we have around this. Do you know there's no standard for the way the buttons are on these things? Some have them as mouse orientation and some have them the other way around. So here's an example of the iframe control that I put in. This one is actually for the sign-in link, but I can change a little bit of this, as we'll see in a second, and get different options, different presentations. I can either have the straight sign-in link, or I can have the blue arrow logo, again, a familiar term of reference for a lot of Live ID users, or I can have the full button. Again, the choice is mine, depending on the UI space I want to allocate. So, just by copying and pasting this kind of thing and registering an app ID. You can see it's included here as a substitution variable. By doing that, that's all it takes to integrate Live ID into my website. Whether that's running in on-premise, whether it's running in my own hosted environment, or whether it's running Azure Services Platform. I can use the same thing throughout. So that's pretty simple, that's pretty straightforward. How does this work? Well, I'm going to quickly go through this. You can see I was redirected to my identity provider. In this case, Live ID. I was then asked to enter my password to my identity provider. And you see the password does never go back to the relying party site. If I authenticate correctly, the site gets a token back and it gets an identifier for me. And it can then do things on my behalf. In this case, it was changing the context menu. And it can do other things as well, depending on the site. So that in its simplest is how it works. The key point is really the step 3. The identity provider is the site that knows my password, and that's the only place I send my password. But as we mentioned, that's a really sucky user experience that we had there. So how do we actually go about improving this? Well, this is something that we got a lot of feedback about when we launched this functionality about a year ago. And we've been looking at some of the options. And really, to us, there are 3 things that we have to think about. The sign-in experience, which is the one we saw there, which is when a user has an account. The sign-up experience, when a user doesn't have an account but wants to create one. And the consent side, which becomes more important as we see data sharing and data portability. We've got functionality now that was actually released a couple of weeks ago for the first 2 of these. And we're still looking at the consent side of things. You might have seen the consent screen that the Live Messenger used that was shown in some of the sessions earlier this week. That's the direction we're heading in, but there's a lot of user research that is going on behind the scenes to try and make this as smooth and seamless an experience as possible. And not just for us in the room, not just for the people at this conference. In fact, probably if it feels right for you, it's wrong for all the other 500 million users we have. The mums and dads, the grannies, the people that don't use computers all the time. That's the hard part of how we have to get the experience right. Us people here, we can handle a lot of this stuff. We understand what's going on, but there's still the problem of the general user base out there. What we want to get is something that's recognizable, particularly from a web design perspective, and not the jarring white screen that we saw. So what we've done is we did a lot of user research on this. And what we found is it's actually quite important to have some frame of reference for the users. It's important that they have some commonality between sign-in screens so they can recognize what they're being asked to do. And so we've divided the screen up into 2 sections. The first one is the orange section here, which is customizable content. Anyone that uses this functionality has pretty much open range to do a lot of stuff here. So you can see on the left-hand side, halfway down, we have a content section. And this is where the site can basically use this for some sort of marketing perspective. They can give the value proposition to the users. And the second thing is the task integration statement. Again, that's a really important part of this screen. It tells the user why have they been asked to sign in. So in this case, if you want to view your files, you have to sign in. So if people get distracted halfway through this, or they go for a coffee or for lunch, they come back afterwards, they see this sign-in screen. What was I doing before lunch? Why am I being asked for this? And if they don't have that continuity, they don't have that context carry through, then they drop off. They will just close this browser and say, well, it wasn't important. So this is really important that we carry these elements through and give the option to sites to provide this kind of information, the context information specific to their site. And you can see some of the things that could be provided, whether it's a logo or some description text or a header image at the top. The second section we have is what we've called the customizable theme section. There are some options to customize this, but they're much more limited. It basically boils down to colors and fonts and things like that. You can't change the actual structure of the page. You can't change the content of the page, just the way it's presented. And again, from the user research, that is a really important point. That's the point that gives users the continuity and the context of this is a live ID sign-in screen. I have to enter my live ID here, not my Yahoo password, not my Google password, not my AOL account password. This is a live ID sign-in. So we've tried to balance these two. And obviously, as a partner, you probably want everything to be in the top bracket, everything to be fully customizable. And from our perspective, we'd like everything to be down the bottom. So we've tried to find the right balance here. And we think we've got a fairly flexible system. So let's take an example of how this works. Just flip this over. So I'm going to go to the place where I manage my App ID accounts. I can spell it right. There we go. So this is the Azure Developer Portal. So I imagine everybody's familiar with this. This is where I have all my applications defined and configured. So I could choose the application that I'm interested in. And you can see it is running. State is started. But down here at the bottom, there's some config information. If I go to the edit section there, I'm presented with two additional options. Customize the sign-in experience and customize the registration experience. I'm going to show you the sign-in experience. Interesting. I should point out as well, this is actually this is a sort of temporary home for this. We're in the process of merging a lot of the current management functionality for sites and applications all into the developer portal. And due to certain release timeframe constraints, we couldn't do that for the PDC release of Azure. So this is the version 1.1, and we'll have a version 1.2 out very shortly, which will have this fully integrated. So I've got some XML here, and I'm just going to upload that. And you can see it's given me a status message. It says it's successfully uploaded. Now to give you some context on what that looks like, oops, not that one. This one. This is the XML that I've just uploaded. And you can see roughly how it's structured. There's a lot of documentation online what all the pieces mean. But effectively, we've got some color information at the top. We've got the text string information down here. And it's all localizable. So you can select different languages and have different translations in there. And the logo as well. The logo can be locale sensitive as well if you wish. So that's the XML that I've just uploaded. So let's see what difference it makes. So again, this is my standard sign-in screen. I haven't changed any config for this application. I haven't had to redeploy this application at all. So let's take a look at the sign-in experience now. And you can see a very different screen here. You can see a lot of the theme is carried through, the green color, the logo. You can also see the task integration statement. To make a reservation, that's why I'm being asked to sign in. And again, the research has shown that that is really useful to help people bridge this gap. And up here we have, again, the content part. It allows us to give a short summary of what's so good about AdventureWorks Resorts. Experience the very pinnacle of all-inclusive excellence anywhere in the world. There you go. So you can see there a very different user experience. A much better user experience. I don't think there's anyone would disagree that the first is better than the second. And so this has quite a lot of potential. And we actually, the first site we've seen that's using this in the wild rather, is livewim.com. And if you look at this screen, you can see the fairly familiar structure. You can see the blue parts on the diagram. So we have the sign-in box down the side, we have the live ID context information, and then we have the site context information. So you can see there's a lot of flexibility here. And just to provide the context, the live WIM color scheme is white, so they're happy with a white background. But they want their logos to carry through. They want their brand to carry through. And to have this part of their experience and not the live ID experience. So we've seen a lot of interest in this. This customized, the customization of these screens has been the most requested feature we've had from our partners since we launched this functionality. And so we're delivering it here for the sign-in and sign-up experience. Not quite sure what's going on behind there. Sounds like we've been attacked by something. So again, this gives you a lot of options on the experience side of things. A lot of ways you can design the experience to fit your user base better. Let's look at another option, though. We mentioned identity aggregators. And again, it's a decision you have to make for your site. How much do you want to integrate closely with one identity provider and have tight control of the experience that your users get, versus having the option for your users to select a number of different accounts to sign in with? You can see here this example. You can sign in with your Live ID account, your Yahoo account, your Google account, your AOL account, or your Facebook account. And that was all configured through a fairly simple website at rpxnow.com. You can also sign in with an OpenID, which is obviously where Jan Rain started out in this business. But what you're doing there is, instead of integrating the UI widgets into your site directly, you're redirecting people through this aggregator service. So they have one more jump, but they have a lot more flexibility. And if they don't have a Live ID account or they don't want to use it, they want to use their Facebook account, then all that is done for you. You just click a little, tick a little box to say, I want my to Facebook enable my site. So that's become an increasingly interesting option that a lot of people are looking at. Again, it comes down to the user experience. In some cases, even 6 boxes is quite challenging. There's a lot of competition for this real estate. This is probably the primest real estate in the identity space at the moment. How do I get my box on that screen if I'm an identity provider? I don't know. I guess we talked to Jan Rain, and they add another box, another row of icons there, and the thing gets bigger and bigger. Someone's done a mock-up of a whole page worth of logos of all the identity providers they could find. It could get that silly. And again, the question is, what about the user experience? But there's actually a lot of interest in some emerging standards out there. OpenID is one that we've been looking at and the rest of the industry is looking at. This allows you to have a specific URL that identifies you, and your identity provider will return that URL to say, I'm showing that this is that user. So we announced at PDC that we were going to become an OpenID provider. We put out a tech preview release at that point. And you can see the details here if you want to try it. This is in our integration environments. So it's specifically for early testers, early adopters to try this out, kick the tires, and give us feedback. We got a lot of great feedback, actually, both bugs in the implementation at the protocol level, and also a lot of feedback about the user experience. The way we had the tech preview, you had to create an alias that was your OpenID alias, and then use that to sign in and authenticate yourself. And that really didn't work. It was interesting functionality. There were definitely a small group of people that would find that useful. So you could have your own alias. You could be called, openid.liveint.com/Jim or whatever. So a lot of options there for the super geeks, but it just didn't work for the mums and pops and grandmas. And so what we're going to do, what we're working on now is the production release. And this is much closer to the web authentication experience that you saw. There'll be a redirect to an OpenID sign-in screen, which will actually be, as we've seen before, customized, but a standard Live ID sign-in screen. You can sign in with your Live ID account, and it will get back an OpenID token for you. So we've learned a lot of lessons from that. I'm not going to demo the experience because the experience we have out there at the moment is actually quite different from the experience we're going to ship in production. Okay, so let's move on. We've looked at how sites consume identities, but how can they consume user data as well? So let's take a quick look at an example. When my mouse comes back. So here I have LinkedIn.com. Maybe you have an account on this site. It's quite useful for business networking. And you can see at the bottom here they have an Add Connections button. So I'm going to press that, and it gives me the option. I can type in the information directly, or I can check my webmail contacts. And they provide a number of options here. So there's a button here for logging with Live ID accounts. There's one for Yahoo accounts. There's one for Google and one for Yahoo. But remember, I'm being asked, this site is asking to impersonate me. If I give this site my username and password, I'm sure LinkedIn wouldn't do this, but they could potentially log in and send emails as me, or delete emails in my mailbox. They would have full power, full control of my account, just because I've typed in my credentials at this point. But they're not my identity provider. So let's go back to the Live ID system. And the Yahoo one is fairly similar as well. So I can log in. Oops. Timed out. Right, let's start again. So this is now going through the process of, interesting. Let me try something else. I was obviously testing this late last night. So I'm going to revoke access to LinkedIn so you can see what the full experience is like. So here is the screen. I'm being asked to give consent to release some information to this site, linkedin.com. The information I'm being asked for is my Windows Live contacts, and they want read access. And I can select the duration. And I have the option, do I allow them or deny them? So let's say I allow them. What's happening now is a delegation authentication token has been sent back to LinkedIn. They can then use that to access my live contacts. But they can only use it for read access, and they can only use it for my contacts. They can't look at my Hotmail email box. They can't update my contacts. They can't look at my photos. It's very scoped what they can do. And as a user, that's exactly what I want. Now, one of the problems we saw here is what we call the scary screen. Let me just refresh this so we can see it again. This screen, it's known internally as the scary screen. It's very off-putting to a lot of users. There's a lot of text. They have to understand what exactly they're doing. And this is a screen that we're really putting a lot of effort into trying to streamline and make the experience better. We're definitely not there yet. This is definitely not the model that we want to end up with. This is really the version 1. And we've got a lot of feedback from that. We're working through the process there, and we'll have a much better version at some point in the future. Okay, so that, at its simplest, is delegation. I delegated my consent to LinkedIn, and they could access my data. So how does that work? Well, LinkedIn, in this case, was the identity provider. They have an application, in this case, the business networking application, that it's useful for me to use, but it's also useful for me to share my data with. So I went through the process of granting them consent. And then they used that token information they got back to send to the resource provider. In this case, it was Windows Live Contacts. And the Live Contact service would check that information, check that token was valid, check it did grant that site access to my contacts, and send back the information. Now what we have here is, you might have seen some of the options. I can grant consent for a long period or a short period, a day or a week or a month. If a site wants to come back and it's got access for a long period of time, like a month, it can go through a process of refreshing those tokens. The tokens they get don't last forever. There's a short-term token that's used for accessing the resources, and then there's a longer-term token which depends on how long I granted consent for. But that, in a nutshell, is how it works. Now, this is the URL you might want to use. Looks like a really scary URL again. We actually provide SDK libraries for this. So we provide open source libraries in 7 different languages. And you can use those SDK libraries to provide all this information. It constructs the URL for you, which I'm sure you'll be very happy to hear. There's a couple of important options. One is the token type, and that's dictated by your resource provider. If they need compact tokens, you need option 1. If they need SAML tokens, you need option 2. The other important piece is this application verifier token. That's a way for the application to identify itself to the Windows Live delegation service. And it's constructed in a way that I won't go into the details of, Again, the SDK library handles all this for you. Okay, so we've seen the technology, but so what? What does this do for you? Well, if we can make it easier for your applications to consume identities, then that removes a lot of the barrier for users to actually use your services and use your sites. And in particular, if we provide a way for not just the 500 million Live ID users, but all those federated domains that we talked about, if they can integrate into this easily, then that's a lot of users that are coming on board that you can use. So there's two parts to this. There's the federation infrastructure itself and the onboarding tools. And the infrastructure we've called the Federation Gateway, the Microsoft Federation Gateway, or MFG. The onboarding tool that actually my team is working on is called the Microsoft Services Connector. We're in the very last throes of the release cycle of this. We expect to have this available for download within the next, in the next month. So this is really close to release. We've had a tech preview out there since PDC. Again, we've got a lot of feedback, and we've taken a lot of that on board. We've taken a lot of feedback as well from our internal IT department. And so the goal here is to have something that the IT professionals will be happy with, but that you'll be happy with to recommend. So let's start with the infrastructure. What does this buy you in the long term? It's all industry standards based, but what it's doing is it's linking service providers and service consumers. And depending on which side of the fence you're in, you either have a lot more services that you can access or a lot more customers that you can access. Some of the services, they could be the Microsoft cloud services, whether that be things like Exchange Online or SharePoint Online or Windows Live services. But it could also be third parties as well. It could be applications hosted on the Azure Services platform. It could also be things that are hosted on any other platform as well. So this is completely standards-based. It's all based on WS Star protocols. It's all WS Trust and WS Federation under the covers. If you're a service provider or an ISV, this gives you a lot of access to these users we talked about. 500 million or more Live ID users, but also the organizations that are starting to come on board into the federated identity system. And the good news is it's free. What more recommendation could you want than that? What this does for you then, trying to paint a picture of this, is it allows your application, your website, to connect to the Federation Gateway, and from there it has access to all the users of all the identity providers that are linked into that gateway. Now obviously, I should mention that the identity providers and the organizations, they do have control. They can say, well, actually, I don't want my users to go to certain websites. So they always have that option. These are their accounts. They get to control them how they want. But in general, we're expecting a lot of organizations will just install this and access all the services, have access to all the services, particularly things like small and medium businesses. The big companies of the world, and Microsoft IT is a good example of this, they have a lot of policies. They're putting a lot of rules in place as to what kind of services people can access with their corporate identity. Because this is what it is. Once I've installed this at Microsoft, I can sign in as my email address at Microsoft.com. So this is actually my work account. So maybe they don't want me accessing, I don't know, sort of things like Match.com or some of the sports sites. maybe they want to turn those off for whatever reason. So the solution we have, we talked about the Federation Gateway side. It's a hub and spoke model. Once you're integrated into this, you get the benefit of not just the things that are integrated when you join, but also the things that come along later. It's been in production since 2006. It's actually been running for quite a while. Why haven't we announced this before? Why haven't we been pushing this before? The simple reason is we've used this with a small number of selected partners. And up to now, it's been an expensive onboarding process for us. There's lots of configuration that has to happen. So now we have a self-service process. You can actually register your site, register your domain automatically with some tools. So the manual process would maybe go to, we could maybe stretch to 20 domains. This allows us to go to, as many as we want. There's literally zero human involvement from our side to onboard every additional partner here. So we're happy with that. But there's the other side. How do you make this happen? How do you, as an organization, connect up to this Federation Gateway? And so we've been working on a piece of software called the Microsoft Services Connector. It connects your Active Directory into the gateway. It does this by a one-time operation that will auto-provision with the Federation Gateway. Also, again, the user experience side of things is important. So, again, you can customize that experience. And to take away even more of a barrier, it's a free download. So if you want your customers to be in this system, if you want your customers to be part of this ecosystem, so that not just your first customer organization, but every other one after that, then they can do this without changing their identity system. I should mention the product we're working on is targeted at Active Directory users, because that's, a lot of our user base use that. But again, this is all standards-based. It's all SOAP XML messages. So there are third-party products out there that are starting to provide this functionality as well. And they can integrate into the Microsoft Federation Gateway just as well as the Service Connector can. So I want to just show a quick video. In fact, two quick videos. So let me switch back to this PC. So these are the videos that were shown. So these are the demonstrations that were shown as part of the keynote at PDC back in October. And I want to point you to this one. This is the actual setup demo. You can see it takes 1 minute. Is that really possible? Can we set up a Federation link in 1 minute? Let's see. Are we okay on the sound there? Cool.
Is how you set up the Microsoft Services Connector. And remember, I'm the IT administrator now, and I only have to enter a few simple things. I have to enter the DNS domain name and the display name that I want, and then I have to enter a certificate to verify my ownership of the domain. Then I also can select who it is that can actually access cloud services using their on-prem identity. It doesn't have to be the whole company. It can be a subset. I can try some and then extend to more users. So then I finish the setup, and what it's doing now is communicating with the Federation Gateway to ensure that I've configured everything correctly, and then I simply close, and I'm done. And it was that simple. I now have federated identity, and it's so simple, as we say at Microsoft, that even a vice president can do it. So now...
So there we go. It actually took longer to explain the process than it did to do the process. And this was a live demo. This is the software that we're releasing next month. This is the software that your customers your organizations can use if they want. Okay, so we've talked about the onboarding tools. You've seen how easy it is to do. It actually takes less than a minute. It's all driven by, if your organization has an SSL certificate for its website, it can use that as proof that it owns that domain. That's how we achieve the auto-provisioning part. So how do we actually go about using this? So let me switch to the other demonstration we have. I have to apologize for not showing this live, but I've been having some problems with my, my server laptop. I've got a big honking laptop, which has been challenged by the network in the hotel since I arrived.
At this company, and you may have noticed.
So let me just start that over again when we go full screen. So this is how do we access a service using federated identity. In this case, it's going to be the CRM service. And this is Dave Thompson, who's the VP that looks after the CRM part of our business.
At this company, and you may have noticed the name of the company. It's the Graphic Design Institute. Okay, so I'm going to launch CRM Online. And the first thing you'll see is that I didn't have to enter a username and password. Okay, up here in the right-hand corner, it shows that I'm already signed in. And that's because I was logged onto AD, and the Microsoft Services Connector authenticated me back to my AD when I accessed the online service.
Again, it took longer to explain what was happening than it did to do it. And we think there's going to be a huge amount of interest in this going forward. The fact that you can have this seamless experience, you can authenticate to a remote cloud service or a remote web application seamlessly using your corporate credentials, your corporate account, is really big. It means it blurs the distinction between whether an application is running on-premise or in the cloud, whether you host it or somebody else hosts it. And the potential here for you as developers of sites and services, again, it gives you a whole extra user base to tap into. So it's kind of a bit of magic. I just want to go through what is actually happening behind the scenes. It's not a trivial piece of functionality, but it is important. This is the way that it provides the seamless functionality. So we have the user on their desktop, and they click on a link, just a normal hyperlink. It's actually a specially constructed one to make this process more streamlined, but we provide a tool to actually construct those URLs. They're sent to the services connector, and they have to authenticate there. Now, if they're using their corporate account on their corporate network, then the services connector can use Windows integrated authentication. And it can automatically check the credentials of that user based on their AD account. And it can then send it back with a token, the token that then gets forwarded to the Federation Gateway. Because we've already set up a link between the Services Connector and the Federation Gateway, the Federation Gateway can then check the ticket and make sure it's coming from a recognized party. And then once that happens, the Federation Gateway issues a service token. So this is a token that is targeted for a particular application. So in the example we just saw, that would be the CRM online service. And the user gets sent there, and the application can then detect who that user is from that token, and then it can grant the service that that user is entitled to. And this has all happened seamlessly. It all happens through the browser, but it all happens automatically. So there's a very seamless experience. And again, I would suggest that's actually where we want to be at. That's where we want to be with cloud services and online services. We want to be able to have this feeling for the users of it doesn't matter whether the application runs on-premise or in the cloud. It's irrelevant to them. If the service can be delivered either way, then great. So let's do a quick roundup of where we're at. We've talked about this from two different perspectives, really, and a third that we've mentioned. We've talked about web developers. In particular, the need for the customization of the user experience, the way that you can make that experience seamless as they sign into your website. And also, how can your website access user data, but in a safe and secure manner from the user's perspective? And again, the key principle here is I only enter my password at my identity provider, and I'm in complete control of my data. I get to choose who it goes to. I get to choose what they can do with it, whether they can read it or update it, or whether they can access my contacts or my email box or whatever. From an ISV perspective, we've also looked at the importance of federated identity. And I hope you've got some of the hint of the potential we see around making it easier for you to sell your services or you being able to buy services from ISVs. Again, removing this distinction between, is it my company's application or is this a cloud application? Again, that takes away a lot of those barriers. The enabler for that is an easy way to onboard those organizations, both from you as an ISV. You don't want to have a big, huge list of instructions that your users have to follow to start using your service. If they can do something that takes less than a minute, then that's pretty good. And also from the organization perspective, I don't know whether you've had much of dealings with corporate IT, but they have a standard answer to any request you send. It's always either no or in 6 months' time. Again, this gives you a lot more option to say, well, it only takes a minute. Couldn't you just do this for me as a favor? I'll buy you a coffee or something, just to try this out. It really removes that barrier as well. And it works with their existing identity infrastructure. We're not asking them to replace what they have with a totally different system for the cloud. So with that, I want to finish and open up for some questions. We've covered quite a lot, so you may want to go back and look at the videos and slides for this afterwards. And there's a lot of information here. But over to you now. Any questions? So the question is, once you've opted into the federation ecosystem, how do you opt out? It's roughly the opposite process. You have an option as part of the setup for the services connector. It can either create a relationship or it can delete an existing one. So again, you're in complete control. Your organization is in control of that relationship.
As a follow-up, say if you're a user at your organization, is there any way for you to block that, or is there any?
So let me just see if I understand the question. Are you asking, can the user block access? So this is where it gets a little bit complex. So there's a couple of principles that we've been using. One is for a domain, let's say Microsoft.com, the company owns that domain. It owns the users within that domain. So they get to make a lot of the choices of how users use those accounts. But if you already have an account with that email address, you may have created this several years ago for your messenger sign-in or something, then you have the option to sort of remove yourself from that domain and rename to a different account name. So if you want to, you can take yourself out of that domain and keep what you already have, or you can merge your existing account with your new works account, your new corporate account. So it depends what you're doing. A lot of people, they do actually use their work address as, for corporate things anyway at the moment. Okay, any more questions?
I can keep going. How would the experience be affected, like using in private in IE8?
How would this experience be affected by in-private mode in IE8? I actually don't know, is the short answer. For whatever reason, our IT department has turned off the option to use in private on our works machines. So I'll need to try that. It should work. It's all based on standard session cookies. So as long as they work, I should actually go along to the Compat lab and see how this pans out. Question here? Okay.
So that sounds like it would have no impact at all, except that you wouldn't have a stored login if you logged in while in private and then started.
Yeah, cool. That's good information. So just to summarize that then, it shouldn't make any difference. The in-private browsing mode, it handles cookies, just does it in a certain way so that they're not persisted. So it should all work. I'll have to try this when I get home though. Question over here?
What is the relationship between this Microsoft Federation gateway and CardSpace? Does it accomplish the same thing?
So the question is, what's the relationship between the Federation Gateway, and I'm going to add in the Services Connector, and CardSpace? So the answer is, one of the options that you have with the Services Connector is you can have a card space issued for your account, and you can use that to authenticate to the Services Connector. So for the first part of the interaction, you can authenticate with a card space card. And the rest of the flow just happens naturally. So we see it as, if you like, a different credential type. Maybe you want to have Windows integrated authentication. Maybe you want certificates. Maybe you want card space or username and password. Those are the basic options that you get. And so the IT controller can turn on any or all of those. So it does work with the Services Connector, and it basically integrates quite seamlessly. I think there was another question here. So the question is, can the user's what I'll call profile information be shared with different sites? At the moment, that can't be done, except for the stuff that's exposed through the Contacts API, which actually covers some of that. But one of the areas we're looking at is this whole profile information, particularly from the OpenID perspective. In an OpenID, there were actually standard protocols for exchanging this kind of profile information, profile attributes. And so we don't have it yet, but it is something we're looking at in our next wave of product development. Just to add a little bit of context there while we're waiting, we're fairly comfortable that the people in this room, in this conference, could understand what they're being asked to do in terms of share this personal information with this website. We have a few things we have to work out about how do we apply this to the mom and pop and grandma and grandpa users that we have. We actually take very seriously protecting our users as one of our core missions. And so you saw the consent screen that was presented, the big scary screen. I'm pretty sure my grandma wouldn't understand what she was being asked to do, let alone would actually be able to make the right decision there. So this is part of the area that we're still looking at the user experience around that side of the UI. Okay, one more question? So the question is, when we say we're looking at OpenID protocols and profile sharing, is that OAuth? The immediate thing we're looking at is things like the attribute exchange functionality in OpenID. But longer term, we're also looking at the OAuth side of things. My money is on the fact that we'll see a lot of convergence between the two protocols. So OAuth is a protocol for sharing data. It's similar to the delegated authentication functionality. It's not quite in the place we want it to be. It's not yet possible for me to specify, I only want to give access to my contacts and I only want read access. So there's a lot of work going into looking at how we can have that scoping information there. And we're working closely with other parties in the industry like Google and Yahoo and AOL and MySpace and Facebook at how we can actually make these protocols work and this experience work. So it'll come. It's not there yet. The actual specifications in OAuth case are not quite there. But we see the future will be the converged protocol.
If you have a look at what Google and actually just did, they used the OAuth and the OpenID hybrid, and they actually took their conversion of people granting permission from like apparently below 50% to 90%. They're streamlining the UI. Yeah, it's pretty interesting because they basically pioneered that.
Okay, with that, thank you for coming. Please fill out your evaluation forms. It is useful for me to know what you thought of this session and what was good and what was bad. There's a collection point at the back. You will be, won't quite be frisked, but please do fill them in. It's important. Thank you.